What's up, everyone? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Croc Nick, and I have an album review for you. Yet another one that came out on the 19th of February was the newest one from Suffering Hour, the Cyclic Reckoning. This came out on Profile Lore Records. This is the band's second full length. Now, technically, this band formed in 2013 in Minnesota and Colorado, but they were actually known as Compassion Dies from 2011 to 2013 before changing their name. Now they have two other EPs. They are a three-piece, and they are blackened death metal, but a very interesting style of it. This is very heavy on the atmosphere, and I had jammed a couple of tracks of this before because they've been slowly leaking out tracks on YouTube, and I think hearing it as an entire album definitely helped me really gauge this band's sound, because this is honestly my first exposure to them. I had heard rumblings, at least through comments on YouTube, that this was a really awesome band to check out, and I was definitely eager after I heard a couple of tracks. And I have to say, I was taken back by one thing right away: the guitar tone. The guitar tone on this album, and I thought it maybe like isolated to one track, at least whatever track they leaked first. I can't remember which one exactly, but it's very dreamy. Like, it's very kind of like gainy. It favors black metal more, I would say. It's not a death metal tone. This is an odd style of blackened death metal if you're just kind of lump it into one fusion subgenre there, because a lot of the death metal aspects are in the vocals. The vocals are deep, gurgled. Occasionally you get some like moans and groans and like a kind of mid-range growl, but most of the time you get like a real deep incantation, immolation kind of growl. It's low, and with all the reverb on everything on this album, it echoes throughout. Like, it sounds absolutely monstrous. But the guitars are definitely more on the black metal side, but it's a very atmospheric style of black metal. It's very ambient. There's lots of dissonant riffing, and we definitely say that word a lot, and I'm gonna say that word a lot on this one in particular, because that is the bulk of the guitar work. It is dissonant, atmospheric, drenched in reverb and delay, but the tone itself is kind of strange. It feels kind of thin, like almost kind of twangy, like there isn't a big sort of hefty chug to it. And like in moments where you would think like a hefty chug would come in, like something like ultra distorted, maybe palm muted, it doesn't do that. It has an almost kind of clean sound. Honestly, it sounds like all the guitars were recorded underwater. They all have very just sort of a dreamy sort of sound to it. It's very strange, like lots of like post-rock, post-metal, post-punk, post-whatever. It has that sort of feel to it. And that was pretty much what I got out of the very first track, Strongholds of Awakening. This is the shortest track on the album, but it's not a short track. It's like 5.5 minutes long. And this album is 44 minutes in 5 tracks. So this is a very long album, essentially, in terms of the song lengths, but it's a very immersive listen. Generally, my first thoughts when it comes down to anything black metal related, whether it's a fusion or straight up black metal, is sort of a dark, foreboding, evil feel. I would have to say, at no point does this really feel evil. This feels more sullen and depressive, though I think the vocals keep it from feeling too depressive. Like, I'm listening to None right now, which is incredibly depressive. But the fact that these low, gurgled vocals sound particularly, heavy and monstrous, honestly, it might be the heaviest thing on here. It kind of kept it from that full-on depressive feel. It still just kind of felt dark and atmospheric. That's pretty much the way I could say it. But again, not evil. Which for me is strange. Like, generally when I go for black metal, I kind of need that sort of snarling in your face sort of feel to it. And then on the death metal side, of course, aggression. This doesn't really get super aggressive at any point. A lot of these songs kind of feel like they're built around like more of like a post-metal setting. Like, I just went over Cult of Luna not too long ago. And in terms of like the peaks and valleys in songs, that was sort of the mode they had. Now the song Obscuration, though, I think is probably one of the more aggressive songs on here. A lot of the other songs really take their time to build, and this one comes out right out of the gate with, blast beats, a little bit sort of heavier feel to it. I think it's maybe because he's playing some, lower chords and they kind of sound a little bit thicker. The bass kind of helps make it sound a little bit heavier, but the bass is honestly kind of far back in the mix. And I would say, if anything, this is almost entirely driven by the guitars. The guitars create the bulk of the atmosphere. The riff structure is wild. Like almost all the time you're gonna hear stuff that is kind of fiercely unique, at least as far as I've heard. There isn't a lot of bands I can draw a lot of comparisons to, but at least on Obscuration, the fact that it was a little bit heavier, a little bit more, you know, just kind of meaty, I guess you could say, it kind of reminded me a bit of Obliteration. Obliteration is definitely more atmospheric death metal, but in terms of those big lush soundscapes, very similar. While I think most of this album is very complex, and I would say technical, but like not like tech death, like Necrophage is technical or anything like that, but technical in terms of the weird riff structure, and sometimes the songs will take interesting, weird, twisted turns. This one was a little bit more straightforward. I think it had a really good flow to it. It actually produced some earworms, like, you know, legit hooks in here, which there are hooks, but they're very specific kinds of hooks. Like if you like the whole dissonant sound, there are plenty of hooks. In fact, the entire album is one big hook if you love dissonant riffing and atmosphere. But if you're looking for something that is just a more straightforward sort of hook, like a flat out just kind of universal metal hook, there are some in Obscuration. There's even a sort of slower, groovier section towards the end of that song that remind me a lot of Tribulation, and I'm realizing so far that all of my comparisons involve the Asian suffix. So yeah, that wasn't on purpose. But it's very similar. It just doesn't have like the goth rock vibes to it. And again, that guitar tone is just strange. And hearing it for an entire album, it's really interesting how he works that. Like I would say these guitars are doubled, even tripled, because they are so out front. And again, the combinations in terms of like notes and structure is very interesting. It's very engaging. Like you're really drawn into this. The Abrasive Black Dusk Part 2, I have not heard Part 1, but I'm not entirely sure it matters, really has some amazing riffs. It actually bookends like really cool isolated dissonant melodies, and it just sort of careens around in this weird sort of spacey sound throughout. But again, these riffs are very just oddly constructed, but they have their own sort of unique hooks. And the drums on here are really good, though I think they're a little bit far in the back. And again, when I think death metal or black metal, I think of some pretty aggressive drumming, mostly on the death metal side. But a lot of this sounds kind of light, like there's not like a big aggressive blast beat, like most of them just feel just kind of light and airy. But that's kind of the mood of the album, and that's the huge feel of it. If hypothetically you were at a party and, you know, all right, now in these days, socially distanced, you put this on, you got control of the aux, this would be like a different what the fuck are you playing sort of moment. Like, you know, if you put on like Cannibal Corpse or Suffocation, yeah, you're gonna get looks. This would be like, dude, I don't know what this is. Are they just hitting random notes? I think that's the sort of feel on this in terms of like not being exposed to music like this at all. It's very strange, but it's very engaging. And again, melodic. Fiercely melodic. That is labored across this entire album. The last track, The Foundations of Servitude, is pretty much where everything comes together for me. This is the longest track on here at 16 minutes and 22 seconds, I think. This is pretty much everything they do except in a giant song that is beautifully constructed. These guys know dynamics. Then they use a lot of different ones. They do the slow builds, they isolate guitars, they isolate spots, they will drop everything out and bring it all back. Essentially, you know, deconstructing and reconstructing the song. And they will throw in some just strange, wild parts. There's a part near the end that has like a really cool descending riff that just kind of pops out of nowhere. It's kind of crazy, but it shifts back and forth between, again, those really creepy dissonant melodies. And I have to say, like, the last maybe quarter of the album is probably the catchiest riff on the entire album. Like, it has a legit hook that I think anyone could get into. The drum work is incredibly solid on this song too. Like, I mean, it's solid on this entire album, but this one in particular, it just keeps the flow going, and it just keeps like nice intense pockets, dropouts, really creative fills. I really enjoyed this song in particular. Like, this was the big standout for me. The earlier songs took a little bit of getting used to. And honestly, a good chunk of it is the production. The production's, it's good, but that guitar tone, I figured that would be sort of like a pocketed thing, like, moments where they would use this tone to sort of like build up the atmosphere of that spot. But rather, it was the entire album, and that it took some getting used to. So overall, I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. I dug this. I really dug this. It is kind of difficult for me to get into just because, I have maybe like a different wheelhouse when it comes down to black and death metal, but I like the fact that this is a very different approach to it, and the melodies are very strong and very creative. If anything, these guys are really doing some wild stuff. And I like their approach. They definitely have great songwriting skill. I think they kind of lay on that guitar tone and the dissonance maybe a bit much. Sometimes the riffs can be a little confusing, but I like when they just kind of settle into a nice hook and then sort of build around there, because I kind of need hooks. That's kind of what, keeps me in there. But I love the atmosphere. This is one of those albums where I think it's like that it's a different kind of heavy, because that is the overall feel. Like, you're just sort of drawn into the atmosphere. It isn't about big chugs or anything like that. Like, the vocals are probably the heaviest thing on here, but in terms of the overall like scope and feel of the album, it's oppressive in its own way. It's heavy. It's dense, it's layered, it's heavy again in its own way. So it's a strange listen, and I'm going to go back to it. I'm definitely going to get a copy of this when I can find one, but I would strongly recommend this. If you're looking for something just to get kind of lost in, this is a great listen for it. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. Also, we have a giveaway going on. Once we hit 4,500 subs, we're going to give away a nice little package of vinyl and 3 CDs. We are almost at that 4,400 mark, so it's actually creeping up now. And thank you guys so much. We thoroughly enjoy this. You guys make it so much more worthwhile. And we love doing this, and I'm glad, you guys seem to like us doing that. So we're going to keep doing it. And honestly, we keep doing it anyway, because I personally love it. But love you guys. Thank you for all your support. We're going to be talking Patreon here at some point. We definitely want to get that started. And we have some other content for you through that as well. So with that, I thank you all very much, and we will catch you later.